Something happened at Andrew Barry's press conference this week that almost nobody actually heard. And I need to be clear about something. The cameras were rolling. The reporters were there with their notebooks open. The recorders were capturing every syllable. Everything was documented. Everything was available. But there's a massive difference between watching something happen and actually listening to what's being communicated. Between being in the room and understanding the frequency the message is being transmitted on. What Andrew Barry said at that podium, standing in front of a room full of professionals whose entire job is extracting meaning from carefully managed language, what he actually communicated, almost nobody picked up on it. I did. And once you understand it the way I'm about to walk you through it, you're going to struggle to think about the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation the same way again. Because what happened at that press conference wasn't a routine media availability. It was an organizational declaration wrapped in the kind of controlled professional language that requires you to actually be listening to receive it. The cameras caught it. But the message? Most people walked right past it. Let me show you exactly what was said, and more importantly, what it actually means. Before we can understand what Andrew Barry communicated at that podium, you need to understand who Andrew Barry actually is. And I'm not talking about his resume or his job title. I'm talking about how he operates at the fundamental level of decision-making and communication, because context is everything here. The person standing in front of those reporters is not an emotional executive. He's not the kind of general manager who lets things slip accidentally, who chooses words carelessly because he's tired or because a question caught him off guard. He's not the type who speaks in abstractions or hides behind corporate jargon when he's uncertain about something. Andrew Barry is one of the sharpest football minds operating at the front office level in this league right now. And that's not me being dramatic or overstating it. That's a consistent evaluation that has held up across years of watching him operate. He has made difficult organizational decisions. He's navigated complex roster situations. He's constructed competitive rosters while managing salary cap mathematics that would make most people's heads spin. When you watch how he builds, how he constructs, how he evaluates talent and organizational fit, you're watching someone who thinks several moves ahead of the moment he's actually operating in. And that matters enormously for what we're about to discuss, because when Andrew Barry stands at a podium, he is doing exactly what he intends to do. There is nothing accidental about his presence there. He's not obligated to be fully transparent. He's not required to tell the world exactly what he's thinking about his quarterback situation or his organizational direction. He chooses to stand there because it serves his purposes to communicate something to the world, to the media, to the fan base, and to the locker room. Every sentence that comes out of his mouth is a deliberate choice. Every word inside that sentence is a deliberate choice. The distinction I'm making might seem subtle, but it's actually the foundation for everything that follows. When you understand that a person operating at Barry's level has chosen a specific word over every other word available to him, and he had options, many of them easier, many of them safer. When you really internalize what that choice means, a press conference that looked routine on the surface becomes something entirely different. It becomes a document. It becomes an organizational statement. It becomes a message being sent in a controlled, professional register that most people aren't actually tuned to receive. Think about how press conferences actually work from the executive's perspective. The general manager knows the reporters are going to ask specific questions. He knows the trajectory those questions will follow. He's probably anticipated the exact phrasing that will come. And he has prepared responses, not scripts exactly, but strategic frameworks that allow him to communicate what he wants to communicate while maintaining the appearance of thoughtful spontaneity. He's managing information flow. He's controlling the narrative. He's doing this while maintaining the professional courtesy and accessibility that the role requires. It's a high-wire act, actually. You have to be accessible enough that people feel like they're getting genuine information. You have to be thoughtful enough that your answers don't sound rehearsed or robotic. You have to be careful enough that you don't accidentally commit yourself to something you don't intend to commit to. And you have to do all of this while actually communicating the organizational direction you want the world to understand. That requires precision. That requires someone who understands the weight of language. That requires someone who knows exactly what different word choices communicate to people who are actually listening. Andrew Barry is that person. So when he stands at a podium and chooses a word, a specific, particular word over every other option available to him, that choice carries weight. It means something. It's not filler. It's not generic praise that he's deploying about any quarterback he's publicly backing. It's a calculated decision made by someone who understands exactly what he's communicating and to whom he's communicating it. This is why the context matters so much. You can't properly evaluate what Barry said at that press conference without understanding the kind of person who's saying it. You can't understand the significance of the words he chose without knowing that he's the type of executive who doesn't choose words lightly. He's not speaking in hypotheticals. He's not being vague or evasive. He's being precise. And that precision, that careful selection of specific language, is what transforms a routine press conference into something that requires actual analytical attention. Because if Andrew Barry says something at a podium, and he says it deliberately, and he says it with precision, then what he's communicating matters. Not as speculation, not as rumor, not as interpretation, but as an actual organizational statement being delivered through the medium of controlled professional language. The general manager of an NFL franchise is not in the business of wasting words. So when those words appear, when they're deliberately chosen, when they're placed at a podium in front of cameras and recorders and notebooks, they deserve to be heard. And they deserve to be understood for what they actually communicate. The word was command. Andrew Barry said he expects Shedeur Sanders to have more command of the offense this season. Now, I know what that might sound like on the surface. It might land as generic praise. It might sound like the kind of careful, positive framing that general managers deploy about any quarterback they're publicly backing. The kind of thing that sounds good in a headline without really committing you to anything specific. But it isn't that. And the reason it isn't that is because of all the words Barry deliberately did not use. He didn't say Shedeur would be more comfortable in the offense. He could have said that. Comfort is a word that executives routinely deploy about quarterbacks whose development they're genuinely uncertain about. It's a word that suggests progression without demanding specificity. It suggests growth trajectory without committing to timeline or certainty. He didn't reach for familiar. He didn't say Shedeur would feel more familiar with the system, more at home, more acclimated to the speed of the game. Those are all words that exist in the executive vocabulary. Those are words that work. Those are words that get the job done in terms of saying something positive without overcommitting. He didn't say adjusted. Adjusted is a word that suggests adaptation. It suggests a player learning, processing, incorporating new information. Adjusted sits comfortably in the space between uncertainty and confidence. It's a word that allows you to praise while maintaining ambiguity about ultimate ceiling or certainty about direction. He didn't say confident. Confident is available. It's easier to say because it carries less architectural weight. When you say a quarterback is becoming more confident, you're describing a psychological state. You're not making a claim about the fundamental relationship between the player and the system he operates within. He didn't say continuing to grow. Growing is the word that protects you most completely. Growth is incremental. Growth is ongoing. Growth doesn't demand an endpoint or a specific level of performance. You can say a player is continuing to grow, and you're technically not predicting anything. You're just saying development is happening. That's a safe word. That's a word that executives use constantly because it commits you to basically nothing while sounding positive and forward-thinking. Barry set all of those words aside. He looked at every option available to him, and he chose something else entirely. He chose command. Command means something architecturally different from all those other words. When you say a quarterback has command of an offense, you're not describing a psychological state. You're not describing comfort level or familiarity or growth trajectory. You're describing structural mastery. You're describing a relationship where the offense lives inside the quarterback rather than the quarterback living inside the offense. Think about the difference. Living inside the offense means the quarterback is operating within parameters that exist outside him. The system is the architecture. The quarterback is the inhabitant. He learns the system. He executes the system. He operates according to the system's logic. Command is different. Command means when the situation gets strange, when the protection breaks down, when the play design dissolves, when the moment demands pure improvised football intelligence. The quarterback does not search for an answer. He already has it. Because the system belongs to him the way a native language belongs to a speaker. A native speaker doesn't think about grammar. A native speaker doesn't pause to remember conjugation patterns. The language lives inside them so completely that expression flows naturally. That's what command means in a quarterback context. The offense is not something the quarterback is learning to operate. It's something the quarterback has internalized so completely that he can operate it instinctively. That is not language you use loosely. That is not language you throw at a player you're still genuinely evaluating or managing through doubt. That is the word you reserve for the guy the whole organizational architecture is being built around. That is the word that means you've already decided. That is the word that communicates, in controlled professional language, that the decision has been made, and what you're watching now is organizational confirmation of something that's already been established. And Barry used it about Shedeur Sanders in public on the record in front of a room full of people whose entire professional purpose is extracting meaning from language, and then he moved forward like it was completely unremarkable. It wasn't. It wasn't unremarkable at all. That single word was the most consequential thing said at that entire press conference. And the majority of people who were in that room, who were listening, who had notebooks open, most of them walked right past it. They didn't recognize the significance. They didn't understand the architectural difference between command and all the other words that could have been deployed in that moment. But once you understand what command actually means, once you internalize the distinction between describing a psychological state and describing structural mastery, once you recognize that Andrew Barry doesn't choose words lightly and that he specifically selected this word over every safer, easier, less committing alternative, once you understand all of that, you're listening to a general manager make an organizational statement. And that statement is that Shedeur Sanders is the quarterback this organization is building around. Now I want to take you to the moment that made everything else crystallize for me. Because what Andrew Barry said about Shedeur Sanders only becomes the full picture when you put it directly beside what he said, and more importantly, what he refused to say about Deshaun Watson. A reporter handed him an opening. The question was essentially straightforward. Doesn't Watson's depth of NFL experience give him a real advantage in this competition? It's a fair question. It's genuinely fair. Watson has started games in this league at a high level. He's operated under postseason pressure. He's been through the kinds of situations that shape a quarterback in ways that reps alone simply cannot replicate. The reasonable answer, the safe answer, the cost-free answer, the zero controversy answer, was sitting right there waiting to be collected. All Barry had to do was acknowledge what's objectively true. Of course, experience matters. Of course, a quarterback who has functioned at that level brings something into a competition that a second-year player hasn't yet been required to produce. Say that and move forward. No drama, clean headline, everyone goes home satisfied. Barry declined. That's the moment. That's what matters. He would not attach Watson's veteran experience to any specific competitive advantage over the player beside him in that room. He acknowledged experience as an abstract attribute, the way you'd acknowledge that height matters in football or arm strength matters, but he refused to connect it to Watson personally. He refused to say that Watson's years in this league constitute a meaningful edge in this particular evaluation. He specifically declined to do the thing that the question was asking him to do, which was validate an obvious advantage. I've been sitting with that moment ever since it happened, because think about what that refusal actually represents. Deshaun Watson carries a $230 million fully guaranteed contract. That's the most fully guaranteed money ever given to an NFL player in history. Cleveland extracted 3 first-round picks from their future to acquire him. 3. That's not a second-round pick. That's not a third-round pick. That's 3 chances to select elite talent in the first round of the draft. Those are foundational assets. That's the kind of capital that restructures a franchise for years. This wasn't a trade for a depth piece. This wasn't a mid-tier acquisition. This was one of the most consequential, most expensive, most scrutinized transactions in the Browns' modern history. It dominated the conversation for weeks. It reshaped the entire organizational trajectory. And the general manager who inherited the aftermath of that transaction, who has to live with the consequences of that decision every single day, stood at a podium and publicly declined to give Watson's years in this league any standing over a quarterback with 7 professional starts. 7. Shedeur Sanders has 7 professional starts in his career. Deshaun Watson has been an NFL starter for years. The experience gap is enormous. The difference in what they've seen, what they've processed, what they've been through in actual game situations, it's not even close. The reasonable thing to do, the thing that almost any general manager would do, is acknowledge that gap. Use it as a baseline. Say yes, experience absolutely matters and Watson has a meaningful advantage in that regard. But Barry wouldn't say it. That is not neutrality. That is not diplomatic protection of a sensitive, competitive situation. That is not a general manager being careful with his words to preserve a delicate internal dynamic. That is a door being shut quietly, professionally, and completely. When a general manager of an NFL franchise looks at a reporter asking about a $230 million investment and declines to validate even the most obvious advantage that player brings to a competition, he's communicating something very specific. He's communicating that the advantage doesn't matter. He's communicating that experience, even extensive experience, even the kind of experience that comes with operating under enormous pressure in playoff situations. Experience is irrelevant to how he's evaluating this particular competition. That's not a small thing. That's not a neutral statement. That's a general manager drawing a line, and the line isn't subtle. He's saying that Watson's years in the league provide no categorical advantage that would influence how this organization is making its quarterback decision. He's saying that when he looks at the 2 quarterbacks, when he weighs the evidence, when he evaluates the competition, the fact that one has far more professional experience doesn't shift the analysis in that player's favor. The financial dimension of all this has been distorting the public conversation around Cleveland's quarterback situation for 2 full years. People keep coming back to the money. They keep saying, well, they can't move on from Watson because of the dead money. They keep focusing on what's already been spent, what's already been committed, what can't be undone. And that's part of the story. But it's not the story that matters most. What matters most is that despite all that money, despite all that capital, despite all that organizational investment and the psychological weight that comes with it, the general manager is publicly treating Watson as if that investment has no standing in the current evaluation. The financial dimension of all this has been warping the conversation for a long time, and I think it's worth addressing directly because the distortion is real and it has consequences for how people understand what's actually happening. Let me be specific about the numbers. Watson is carrying a $44.9 million cap hit against the Browns' salary cap this season. That's an enormous number. That's the kind of money that fundamentally constrains what an organization can do with the rest of its roster. That's the kind of money that makes it structurally difficult to add depth, to address needs, to remain flexible in free agency or at the trade deadline. And the dead money situation, the money that would hit the cap if Cleveland moved on from Watson, makes the mathematics essentially impossible to absorb. We're not talking about a number that a competitive organization can just eat. We're talking about damage that would fundamentally cripple the salary cap for a year or multiple years. So Watson isn't going anywhere. The dead money math makes that structurally impossible. The Browns are not in a position to absorb that kind of damage to a roster they're actively trying to make competitive. That's just the reality. That's just mathematics. So he is on this team. He is drawing this paycheck. He is doing both of those things. And he's doing them while his own general manager publicly treats his professional experience as having no categorical advantage over the quarterback, who played behind one of the worst offensive lines in the conference last season. That's the moment where the sunk cost psychology becomes relevant. That's where we need to talk about what happens when organizations let past financial decisions dictate present competitive decisions. There's documented psychology around this phenomenon. When an organization has invested enormous resources in something, money, draft picks, organizational capital, emotional investment, there's a gravitational pull to keep validating that investment. There's a pull to arrange the roster, to make the decisions, to structure the depth chart in ways that protect the appearance of good past judgment. Because acknowledging that the investment didn't deliver what it promised, that the expensive decision didn't work out the way it was supposed to, That requires institutional honesty that's genuinely difficult to maintain when that much money and that many draft assets are sitting on the wrong side of the ledger. Most organizations let that psychology steer them. Most franchises keep the expensive quarterback starting because the alternative demands they stand publicly and say the most expensive decision in franchise history did not deliver what it promised. That's hard. That's humbling. That's the kind of organizational admission that carries real consequences for how people perceive your judgment, your decision-making, your competence as a front office. So they arrange everything else around protecting that decision. They keep losing, but they're losing in a way that allows them to maintain the fiction that the expensive investment was justified. They restructure the supporting cast. They adjust the offensive system. They make changes everywhere except the one place that would actually address the problem. And those organizations keep losing. Year after year, they keep losing because they are arranging their roster to protect the appearance of good pass judgment rather than to actually win football games. They're optimizing for organizational face, saving instead of optimizing for competitive reality. And the result is that they waste years. They waste organizational talent. They waste the windows when everything else is aligned in a way that would allow them to compete. They waste all of it because they can't bring themselves to move on from a decision that didn't work. What Andrew Berry communicated at that podium is that Cleveland is categorically refusing to be that organization. The $230 million is permanently spent. 3 first-round picks are permanently gone. Neither of those facts changes based on who is taking the first snap in September. The only question that survives honest analysis is which quarterback gives this team the best probability of winning football games. Which quarterback gives this organization the best chance to actually be competitive? Which quarterback should be on the field when the outcomes that matter most are being decided? And Barry answered that question without ever phrasing it as an answer. He answered it through language. He answered it through what he chose to say and what he chose not to say. He answered it by using the word command about one quarterback and declining to validate the experience of the other. He answered it by structuring an entire press conference in a way that communicated the organizational direction to anyone actually listening. The money is spent. The picks are gone. Those are sunk costs. They're in the past. They inform the current situation only to the extent that they've already been paid and therefore cannot influence the current decision. What matters now is only the future. What matters is which quarterback gives this team the best chance to win. And that's the question the organization has been evaluating all offseason. And that's the question that Barry answered at that podium in one carefully chosen word. Now I want to walk you through the tail end of the press conference because I think it adds the structural piece that makes the whole picture complete. When Talon Green came up in the conversation, Andrew Berry described his development in language that was genuinely patient and measured. The frame was essentially crawl, walk, run, take your time, develop at your own pace. This organization has a genuine investment in your future, and we believe in what you can become, but that future is further down the road. The organizational investment in Green is real. The belief in his trajectory is real. But his role in the competitive calculus of this particular season is not the primary point of his presence on this roster. The point is building towards something further down the road. Development, progress, growth, time, and I want to be clear that this is completely appropriate language for a 6th-round developmental pick. There's nothing critical in that framing. It's just honest and correctly calibrated to the organizational situation. A 6th-round pick isn't your franchise quarterback. A 6th-round pick might become something useful, might develop into a solid backup, might eventually become a starter somewhere down the line. But the timeline is measured in years and the certainty is measured in maybes. But here's the thing that's important. The distance between crawl, walk, run, and command of the offense is not a matter of degree. It's not a spectrum where those two characterizations sit at different points along the same line. They are categorically different communications delivered in the same room within the same press conference about the same competition. Barry gave Green the developmental framing that fits his moment. He gave Watson the kind of measured professional courtesy that you extend when an internal situation has already been resolved and you're simply honoring the person's dignity in the process. He gave Shedeur Sanders the language that organizations reserve for the quarterback their entire offensive structure is being organized around. 3 different conversations, 3 different organizational categories, all wrapped in the same controlled, even, professional register. So the surface reads as carefully balanced even while the actual substance underneath it is moving in one very clear direction. That's the art of what Barry did at that podium. That's why most people didn't pick up on it. Because on the surface, it sounds like a general manager discussing his quarterbacks in measured, professional tones. And he is doing that. But he's also doing something else entirely. Let me expand the lens, because nothing Barry said at that podium exists in isolation. His press conference slots into a broader organizational architecture that Cleveland has been constructing all offseason. And when you see the full picture, when you see how all the pieces fit together, the direction becomes undeniable. Spencer Fino was selected 9th overall in the draft. 9th overall. That's a premium pick at a premium position. An offensive tackle whose professional purpose on every single snap of every game that matters is protecting a franchise quarterback's ability to function in a clean pocket. You don't use a 9th overall pick on offensive line depth. You use it on someone you believe is going to be a foundational piece protecting your franchise quarterback for years. Denzel Washington and Casey Conception were brought in with specific route versatility and contested catch ability. These are receivers who complement a timing-based, accuracy-driven passing game. You're not building a system for a quarterback who relies on improvisation and extend plays. You're building for someone who can operate with precision from a clean pocket. The defense that finished in the league's top 5 last season is coming back structurally intact, which means the offensive infrastructure being built around it has to be capable of supporting a team that can compete right now, not 3 years from now through a rebuild. And then there is Todd Monkin, the offensive coordinator. I want to stay here for a moment because this detail is more significant than most coverage has given it credit for. Monkin had 0 involvement in the Watson acquisition. He carries 0 psychological investment in that decision. He doesn't need to validate $230 million through the depth chart he writes each week, because that money was committed before he ever walked into the building, and he owes it nothing. He's not burdened by the sunk cost psychology. He's not walking around carrying the weight of a decision he didn't make. Every single organizational decision that Cleveland has made since last season ended, every hire, every signing, every draft pick connected to the offensive architecture, points toward the same person. The 9th overall tackle protecting that person. The receivers complementing that person's timing and accuracy. The coordinator who has no psychological baggage about validating the expensive alternative. The defense that has already been constructed and is coming back. The entire organizational apparatus is being arranged around one direction. And then the general manager steps to a podium and uses the word command about that person while refusing to credit the veteran alternative with any categorical advantage. It's not an accident. It's not disconnected. It's a complete organizational picture being communicated through architecture, through hiring decisions, through draft choices, and through carefully managed language at a podium in front of cameras and recorders. Let me zoom in on Todd Monkin for a moment because I think his presence in this situation is more significant than people realize. Actually, that's not quite right. His absence from the Watson decision is what matters. Monkin had 0 involvement in the acquisition of Deshaun Watson. 0. He didn't sit in the room when that deal was being discussed. He wasn't part of the evaluation process that determined Watson was the answer to Cleveland's quarterback problem. He didn't help construct the argument for why 3 first-round picks and $230 million fully guaranteed was the right investment for this franchise. That matters. It matters enormously. Because when you're an offensive coordinator walking into a situation where a previous regime made an enormous, expensive, complicated decision about the quarterback position, you carry that decision with you whether you like it or not. The previous coordinator, the previous regime, they made a statement by acquiring Watson. This is our guy, this is what we're committing to, this is the direction the organization is moving. And when a new coordinator arrives, there's an inherent pressure to validate that decision, to prove that it was the right call, to structure the offense in a way that showcases Watson's strengths, to build a system that makes him look good because if he doesn't succeed, then the decision that brought him here looks bad. That's sunk cost psychology operating at the operational level. It's not something the coordinator is consciously thinking about, necessarily. It's just the weight of the situation. It's the gravitational pull that comes from walking into a job where someone else has already committed enormous resources to a particular direction. You're inheriting not just a roster decision, but an organizational declaration. And at some level, you're psychologically invested in proving that declaration was justified. Todd Monkin doesn't have that burden. He walked into Cleveland's building for the first time after Watson was already here, after the trade had already been made, after the money had already been committed. He has zero psychological investment in that decision. He didn't help make it. He doesn't need to validate it. He doesn't need to structure an offensive system that proves it was the right call. He's free, actually free, to make the decision that's best for the team based purely on competitive merit. That's the structural freedom that makes everything else possible. That's why Monkin's hiring is so significant. Because if you're an organization that's genuinely evaluating which quarterback gives you the best chance to win, if you're trying to make that decision based on pure competitive merit rather than sunk cost psychology, the last thing you want is a coordinator who feels psychologically invested in validating a previous decision. You want someone who can look at both quarterbacks, look at the circumstances, look at the competitive realities, and make recommendations based solely on what gives the team the best chance to win. Monkin is that person. His lack of investment in the Watson decision is actually his qualification. It means he can stand at a line of scrimmage and call plays based on what's best for the offense, not based on what's necessary to prove that $230 million acquisition was justified. It means he can structure an offense around the quarterback who's actually generating the most explosive plays, the most efficient execution, the most confident decision-making, regardless of who that quarterback is or how much money is attached to him. That freedom is crucial. Because the thing about offensive coordination at the NFL level is that the coordinator has massive influence over which quarterback looks good. The coordinator can design plays to showcase specific strengths. The coordinator can scheme receivers open in ways that set up a quarterback to be efficient. The coordinator can call games in a way that builds confidence. And conversely, the coordinator can design an offense that works against a particular quarterback's strengths, that puts him in uncomfortable positions, that creates situations where execution is difficult. An offensive coordinator who's trying to validate a $230 million investment might unconsciously design an offense that works best for Watson. Not because he's being dishonest about it, but because there's an incentive structure pointing in that direction. But an offensive coordinator who has no investment in that decision, who is purely focused on winning, who has freedom to make his recommendations based solely on merit, that's a completely different situation. Every single organizational decision that Cleveland has made points toward one direction. But the Monkin hiring is perhaps the most telling. Because what the organization is saying through that hire is, we need someone who can evaluate our quarterback situation without the burden of validating previous decisions. We need someone who can look at both players, see what both players are capable of, and make recommendations based purely on competitive merit. We need someone free from the sunk cost psychology that typically clouds these situations. And that's exactly what they got. Monkin is operating without that burden. He can watch Shedeur Sanders practice and think about the system. He can watch Watson and evaluate it the same way. He can make the offensive calls that are best for the team. He can have conversations with the coaching staff about quarterback performance without carrying the psychological weight of needing to prove that any previous decision was justified. That freedom changes everything. Now, I need to be precise about something here, because I think it's genuinely important to be honest about what the competition actually is and what it isn't. The quarterback competition in Cleveland is real. I am not suggesting that what the organization is running through this offseason is theater. I'm not saying it's a carefully staged performance designed to protect optics, while the actual decision sits already filed somewhere in Andrew Berry's office. That's not what this is. Organizations that genuinely care about winning football games, and Berry's track record makes clear that he's one of them, organizations like that maintain real competitive structures because you learn things from genuine competition that you simply cannot learn any other way. You cannot learn those things from a film session. You cannot learn them from individual workouts. You cannot learn them from hypothetical scenario discussions. You have to put players on the field. You have to put them in situations where the evaluation is live, and the pressure is real, and the stakes feel genuine. How does a quarterback respond when the second-team defense is specifically scheming against his tendencies? You can't fully evaluate that without putting him on the field against a defense that's designed to expose weaknesses. How does he handle a bad practice? The kind where nothing goes right and every throw feels off, and protection assignments are broken, and receivers are dropping balls. And then he has to come back the next morning and perform again? That reveals something about resilience, about mental toughness, about ability to respond to adversity. The decision-making under pressure, real pressure, live evaluation, knowing the coaches are watching every single rep with genuine attention, that only reveals itself when the pressure is actually real. All of that information matters. The coaching staff is watching with genuine attention. The offensive coordinator is taking notes. The quality control coaches are breaking down film. This isn't a fake competition. It's a real evaluation process. I am not suggesting otherwise. But here's the thing that requires the most careful attention, because I think this is where the actual nuance lives. Both things can be simultaneously true. The competition can be genuinely real, and the direction can already be essentially established. A genuine evaluation process can still be operating inside parameters that were substantially determined by the weight of everything the organization observed and concluded prior to the formal competition beginning. These two things are not contradictory. They can exist in the same space at the same time, and that's exactly what's happening in Cleveland. Think about how this works at the structural level. An organization spends an entire off-season gathering information. They're watching practice. They're evaluating performance. They're attending meetings. They're building infrastructure. They're making draft decisions and hiring decisions and personnel decisions. All of that is information. All of that is observation. All of that is data being collected about the direction the organization should move. By the time the formal competition arrives, by the time training camp begins and real evaluation starts, that organization has already accumulated an enormous amount of evidence pointing in a particular direction. That evidence doesn't disappear. That information doesn't become irrelevant. It just becomes the framework inside which the formal competition operates. The coaching staff will evaluate every rep with full attention and full rigor. They will watch closely. They will take notes. They will study film. The evaluation is genuine. But the conclusion of that evaluation, when it arrives, will almost certainly confirm what the organization has already been quietly concluding through all the earlier observations and architectural decisions. Barry held both of these realities in the same press conference. He was being completely truthful about the fact that this is a genuine competition, and he was simultaneously communicating, through language and through the architecture of organizational decisions, that the direction has essentially been established. These aren't lies. These aren't contradictions. They're just the normal way that professional sports organizations actually operate. A real evaluation doesn't require an open ending. A genuine process doesn't require uncertainty about where it's leading. You can run a real evaluation, you can put real attention into it, you can gather real data and real information, and still have a pretty clear sense of what the conclusion is going to be because you've already gathered so much evidence pointing in one direction. The evaluation confirms, it validates, it solidifies, but it doesn't typically surprise. Think about how this works in human decision-making. You're making a major life decision. You gather information. You consider options. You think carefully about what's best. You might even go through a formal evaluation process where you list pros and cons and really consider both sides. But by the time you've gathered enough information to be ready to decide, you usually already know what you're going to decide. The formal process isn't discovering the answer. It's validating the answer you've already arrived at through observation and thought. That's what's happening in Cleveland. Barry is not going to be shocked by where this evaluation leads. The coaching staff is not going to suddenly discover that Watson is the guy and it changes everything. The data has been pointing in one direction. The architectural decisions have pointed in one direction. The language at the podium pointed in one direction. The evaluation will complete, and it will confirm what's already been substantially established. And that's not a criticism. That's not suggesting the competition is fake. That's just acknowledging how organizational decision-making actually works when it's being done carefully and thoughtfully, and with genuine attention to gathering evidence. The conclusion has probably already been written, but the evaluation is still real. I want to spend a moment with Deshaun Watson's situation on a purely human level, because I think it deserves acknowledgement even as I'm making clear it doesn't change the football analysis at all. This goes beyond statistics and quarterback evaluation. This is about a human being navigating an extraordinarily complicated professional circumstance. What Watson is dealing with right now is genuinely brutal in a way that I think gets underreported. And I think it gets underreported specifically because the financial enormity of his contract makes it difficult for most people to extend genuine empathy. It's hard to feel bad for a guy making $44.9 million against the cap in a single season. It's hard to feel bad for someone who signed the most fully guaranteed contract in NFL history. The numbers are so enormous that they create a psychological distance between his situation and the situations most people navigate. But let me break down what's actually happening from a human perspective, stripped of the financial layer. Watson signed the most fully guaranteed contract in NFL history. That wasn't just money. That was a declaration. That was an organizational statement that said, "You are the franchise. You are the centerpiece. We are building everything around you. We are committing our resources to you. We are declaring to the world that you are the answer." He was coming off a difficult period. There were complications. There were things that needed to be worked through. And this franchise said, "We believe in you. We're all in." Here is the money that proves it. He is now sitting in a quarterback room where his own general manager publicly treats his years of NFL experience, his professional accomplishments, his proven track record of functioning at a high level under pressure. He's sitting in that room and watching his general manager treat all of that as having no categorical advantage over a second-year player. Think about what that feels like. Think about what that communicates. Think about what it means to have been declared the franchise centerpiece and then slowly, through organizational architecture and careful language, to be repositioned as a backup candidate. Any competitor who has ever cared about football, who has tied their identity and their sense of professional purpose to their ability to perform at the highest level, would feel the weight of that. That's not weakness. That's not oversensitivity. That's the natural response of a human being who has dedicated his life to excellence in his field, and then finds himself being publicly repositioned as uncertain in that field. The circumstances are brutal because they require a degree of professional equanimity that most human beings never have to locate. Most human beings are never placed in a position where they have to absorb being repositioned from franchise centerpiece to backup candidate while carrying the financial and symbolic weight of the deal they signed. Most people never have to navigate that specific combination of circumstances. The contract is fully guaranteed. The organization can't move on because of dead money. So they're stuck with each other. They're stuck in a room together. And they're stuck with the organizational decision that they're now repositioning away from. The frustration that Watson might feel makes complete human sense. As a human being navigating a complicated professional circumstance, the frustration is entirely justified. The sense of injustice is entirely justified. If I were in Watson's position, I would feel the weight of that situation. I would feel confused about how the organization that declared me the centerpiece is now treating my experience as irrelevant. I would be frustrated. I would be angry. I would struggle with it. But, and this is the important part, as a football consideration, as something that should influence how Cleveland constructs its depth chart and makes its competitive decisions, the frustration is not a factor. Barry made that irrelevance official and on the record. The organization is saying, "We understand this is difficult for you as a human being. We respect what you've accomplished in this league, but the competitive decision is being made purely on merit. And the merit is pointing in a different direction." That's hard for Watson. I don't want to minimize how hard that is. But it's also the right organizational approach. It's the approach that a front office that cares about actually winning has to take. They can't let human sympathy, genuine, justified human sympathy, dictate a decision that impacts the entire franchise's competitive future. They have to put that aside and make the decision based purely on what gives them the best chance to win. And the way Barry communicated that, the way he did it, actually demonstrates a kind of respect for Watson's dignity. There was no discomfort in his voice when Watson's name came up. No visible tension. No sense of a man choosing his words extra carefully because the ground beneath him is unstable. There was no awkwardness, no sense that this is a messy situation being anxiously managed. The composure was consistent from beginning to end, which tells you something important about how the organization views the situation. This is not complicated. This is not messy. This is a professional situation being handled professionally. That composure is actually more honest than if Barry had expressed sympathy or discomfort or seemed anxious about the situation. The composure communicates that the organization has made a clear decision and they're at peace with it. And part of being at peace with it is extending professional courtesy to the person who's being affected by it. It's not cruel. It's not dismissive. It's just clear. And clarity, even when it's difficult, is actually more respectful than ambiguity. Let me focus on something that's subtle but deeply significant: Andrew Barry's composure when discussing Deshaun Watson. This is a detail that most people glossed right over, but it tells you everything about the organizational status of this situation. There was no discomfort in his voice when Watson's name came up. No visible tension. No sense of a man carefully choosing his words because the ground beneath him is unstable. No indication that he's navigating a minefield of sensitivity. The composure was consistent from beginning to end. When he talked about Sanders, he was composed. When he talked about Watson, he was composed. When he talked about Green, he was composed. One register, one tone, one level of professional calm throughout the entire press conference. And that consistency is important because it tells you something crucial about the internal status of the situation. If this were a messy internal situation being anxiously managed, if there were real organizational uncertainty about the direction, if this were a sensitive situation where feelings were fragile and the decision hadn't been made, you would feel that anxiety in the room. A general manager operating at Barry's level cannot hide that kind of internal turmoil if it exists. The tension would bleed through. His word choice would become more careful. His pauses would become more deliberate. His tone would shift. We'd sense the discomfort because it would be real. There was none of that. The composure reflected something important. This is not a messy internal situation. This is a situation that has already been resolved. The organization has made its decision. The direction is clear. The uncertainty has been eliminated. And Barry is standing at a podium communicating that clarity through the consistency of his presentation. Think about how different this would sound if the situation were actually uncertain. If Barry genuinely didn't know which quarterback was going to be the starter, if this were a real open competition where the outcome could go either direction, if the evaluation was genuinely unresolved, the energy in that room would be different. There would be tension. There would be genuine stakes in how he answered questions. Every word would feel like it mattered because every word could influence the competitive situation or reveal information he wanted to keep private. None of that was present. The energy was calm. The composure was genuine. The communication was clear. And that calmness communicates something very specific to anyone actually listening. The decision is made. The direction is established. What we're watching now is the process of executing that decision and making it official through the proper organizational channels. There's actually a kind of compassion in that composure. Because the alternative, if Barry were standing there with visible discomfort, with tension in his voice, with careful deliberation over every word about Watson, that would actually communicate something harsher. That would communicate anxiety. That would communicate messiness. That would communicate that the organization is struggling with a difficult decision and hasn't fully committed to the direction they're moving. The clarity is actually more humane than confusion would be. When you make a decision and you're at peace with it, when you've thought it through and you understand the reasoning and you're confident in the direction, you can talk about it calmly. You can communicate it clearly. You can extend professional courtesy to everyone affected because you're not burdened by doubt. You're not second-guessing yourself. You're operating from a place of organizational clarity. And that's what Barry is operating from. He has thought through the Watson situation. He has evaluated it. He has made a decision about what it means for the franchise going forward. He is at peace with that decision. And he can communicate it from a place of calm professional clarity, which actually means he can treat Watson with dignity even as he's communicating that the organization is moving in a different direction. Here's what that composure reveals about the organizational psychology. Cleveland is not operating from a place of doubt. They're not second-guessing themselves. They're not anxiously trying to validate a past decision. They're not burdened by sunk cost psychology. They have made a clear, confident decision about who their quarterback is going to be going forward. They have thought through the implications. They understand the timeline. They understand what needs to happen next. And they're at peace with it. That peace is visible in the composure. That confidence is visible in the tone. That clarity is visible in how the general manager carries himself at the podium. Most organizations dealing with the Watson situation, the financial commitment, the trade capital, the organizational investment, most organizations would feel burdened by that. Most would let the sunk cost psychology create tension and anxiety. Most would signal that discomfort because it would be genuine. Cleveland is signaling something different. They're signaling clarity. They're signaling confidence. They're signaling that they have worked through the difficult parts and they've arrived at a place where they understand what's best for the franchise. And they're prepared to move forward with that understanding. The composure is the tell. The calmness is the revelation. When a general manager stands at a podium and talks about a complicated situation with genuine professional calm, he's telling you that the situation is no longer complicated inside the organization. The decision is made. The direction is clear. The rest is just execution. At some point, probably soon, someone is going to stand in front of cameras and microphones and make an official announcement about the Browns' starting quarterback. That moment is coming. We all know it's coming. The announcement will be put in plain, unambiguous language. Someone will say, "Shedeur Sanders is our starting quarterback." The decision will be made official. The competition will be declared over. The direction will be formalized into an organizational statement. When that announcement comes, I want the people who are paying attention to understand exactly what that moment will represent. It won't be a decision being made in that room. It will be a decision that was already made being translated into language that requires no frequency calibration to receive. When the reporter asks a question and the official response is delivered, that's not the decision-making happening. That's the decision that was already made being put into plain English. The actual decision-making happened somewhere else. It happened in film sessions where the coaching staff sat down and broke down every rep, every throw, every decision, every moment where a quarterback made a good play or made a mistake. It happened on practice fields during evaluation windows that the coaching staff was studying with far more care and far more rigor than any press conference ever reveals. It happened in hallway conversations between coaches. It happened in private organizational meetings where people sat down and said what they really thought without the filter of public discourse. It happened in private conversations between Andrew Berry and the offensive coordinator and the quarterback coach and the head coach. Conversations where they could be completely honest about what they were seeing, about what the data was telling them, about where the evaluation was pointing. Conversations that happened without cameras, without reporters, without the need to maintain public diplomatic courtesy. Real conversations where real evaluations happen. It happened across an entire offseason. It happened through every draft decision. It happened through every hiring decision. It happened through every strategic choice about offensive personnel and offensive architecture. Each one of those decisions added weight. Each one added direction. Each one added evidence pointing toward a conclusion. And by the time the offseason ended, by the time training camp began, by the time the evaluation window opened formally, the organizational consensus had already formed. The direction had already been established. The evidence was overwhelming. And the only thing that remained was for that decision to be formalized, for the conclusion to be put into official language, for the direction that had been communicated through implication and architecture to be communicated through direct statement. That's what the announcement will represent. It won't be a moment of decision. It will be the moment when the decision that's already been made becomes official. Think about what that means for the people involved. Shedeur Sanders already knows he's going to be the starter. He's been hearing it through organizational decisions. He's been hearing it through the way the offense is being built around him. He's been hearing it through press conference language. He doesn't need an announcement to tell him that the organization has decided he's the guy. He already knows. He's been living inside that knowledge since the moment those draft decisions were made and that offensive architecture started being constructed. Deshaun Watson already knows the direction as well. He's been hearing it through the same mechanisms. Through what was said and what wasn't said. Through what the organization chose to invest in and what it didn't choose to invest in. through the hiring of an offensive coordinator with no investment in validating his acquisition, through the general manager's composure and word choice at a podium. Watson already knows the direction. The announcement won't surprise him. It will just formalize what he already understands. So when the announcement comes, when someone stands in front of cameras and makes it official, understand that what you're witnessing is not a decision being made. What you're witnessing is a decision that was already made becoming official. What you're witnessing is private organizational conclusion being translated into public language. What you're witnessing is the formalization of a direction that the organization has been communicating through every other available channel. The real decision-making is happening now. It's happening in practice sessions. It's happening in film review. It's happening in private conversations. It's happening every single day as the organization gathers data and evaluates quarterbacks and builds consensus about the direction they need to move. The announcement is just the moment when all of that private decision-making becomes public knowledge. That's an important distinction to understand. Because if you're waiting for an announcement to tell you what the Browns' direction is, you're waiting for something that's already been communicated through 100 other channels. The announcement is just the final formalization. The decision has already been made. The organizational consensus has already been reached. The direction is already established. The announcement will just put it into language that can be reported on, that can be quoted, that can be put into headlines. But the real story, the real decision, the real organizational direction, the real truth about what Cleveland believes about its quarterback situation, that story was already told at a podium by Andrew Berry when he chose the word command and declined to validate a $230 million investments experience. That was the story. That was the announcement. Everything that comes after is just the formalization of a conclusion that's already been reached.